Hello, I'm Curtis Swantek with the Indiana County Conservation District. I'm the agriculture technician, and I'm with the Soils and Land Use station for the Envirothon. In today's lesson, we'll be learning how water moves through the landscape, some of its uses, and how farmers and all of us can protect the water as it goes through our landscapes that we live in. One of the terms we're going to learn about today is soil infiltration. Infiltration is when the rain comes down onto the soil surface. It is absorbed at a certain rate depending on what is on top of the ground and what is made of the soil below the surface. Crops and farm fields are one of those things that have determine infiltration rate, and also the practices that we keep referring to are what keep water infiltrating into the ground instead of running off down to the hill into the stream. Soil infiltration rate can be increased or decreased by things such as soil compaction and the organic layer, which is all the plant matter and leftover residue from the various bacteria and other organisms that represent the living part of the soil on the surface. Planting one crop in an entire field over and over again decreases soil organic matter while increasing soil compaction. Practices such as reduced tillage and increasing equipment size decreases compaction, and also using multiple species cover crops such as turnips and radishes help create more organic layer and help reduce compaction, thus increasing the infiltration rate and the ability for the farmer to have healthy soils. The soil is made up of three different particles, all soil is. That's clay, sand, and silt. Clay being the smallest, sand being the largest. These particles clump together and create gaps and porous areas between them as they are in the landscape. The more gaps you have, the more water can be held by the soil and the easier water infiltrates down into the soil. Something that is a very sandy soil will have a lot of water capacity and drain very well, whereas a high clay soil will not drain at all and have water sitting on top of it. So this demonstration will be for soil infiltration of the water into the profile of the material. For here today we have clay, topsoil, and sand to represent different parts of the soil structures. Based on things we talked about earlier, there'll be different rates of infiltration in each of these materials. We will be using the Kool-Aid again as material to represent any pollutants, nutrients, or anything else on the surface to show how it moves through the soil when you have water moving through that surface. We will also be putting a half cup of water into each sample so that it is the same throughout each as we test it and see what we see in the bottom of each jar after pouring the water into it. So as we see here, we have most of the water's already done dripping in this one. It's still dripping in this one, and still dripping with much less in the bottom of the last one representing clay. So what we saw is that the water went fastest through the sand, slower through topsoil, slowest through the clay. We see more nutrients from the Kool-Aid in the sand, less in the topsoil, least in the clay. What that is because the particle size is the largest, leaving more porous spaces for the water to infiltrate quickly through this material, and going down to clay being the smallest particle size, having the least amount of porous spaces. Now, there's quite a bit of similarity in color from the Kool-Aid to each one. What that also can be shown is a example of where vegetated cover and the organic layer on the top of the soil absorbs those nutrients, so having, again, vegetated cover stops pollution. So as we can see in this top-down view, we have more nutrients in the sand, and less nutrients, less dark of a color in the topsoil, and the least darkest color in the clay, showing that the soil material definitely has impact on what pollutants can get into the groundwater. A high soil infiltration rate prevents nutrients and other pollutants from running off into the stream's waterways. It does this by both the organic layer and, as we just discussed, the type of soil. So the organic layer and the living plants that are on a surface capture and hold nutrients such as fertilizer, or in the terms of a farmer, manure, from running off and going into the stream, creating pollution. This also applies to lawns and any other land. All land receives rain. All land has a certain infiltration rate, that whether it lets it go into the stream or not, or into the groundwater or not. Soil particle size is very important to that, because the soil particle size will hold those nutrients while the plants get to use them, and then that becomes part of the cycle within the life cycle of the plants, and not into as a pollution into our drinking or surface waters. Behind me here we see that contour strips, which is different strips across the hillside of different plant crop types planted to prevent runoff, which is one of the things we'll learn about today and just demonstrate later on in the video. Farmers use these practices to keep their soil on the ground where it's at and not down in the stream. There's additional farm practices besides the contour strips and cover crops that farmers can do to prevent nutrients and manure getting into the stream, such as having setbacks from the waterways and wells and springs whenever they spread manure, having animals fenced out of the stream, and then also having a fence along the stream lets vegetation grow along it, so both that from animals and from crop fields there's a vegetative buffer between the stream water and the rainwater coming through the field that might bring nutrients. That buffer will catch those nutrients. And it's not just farmers that have to deal with rainwater and to deal with these things, the responsibility to protect the streams and water sources. Every area gets rain on it. Every area leads that water to somewhere, to either join a stream or to join groundwater. Your home lawn, a golf course, your driveway, a parking lot for a store, the roads, everything receives rain. Everything has other issues on it. There are different soil types or different surfaces, such as the lawn to a road, that cause and change infiltration rate and runoff rates. Every one of us can do things that keep nutrients on our properties and not in the stream and waterways. So now we're going to have some demonstrations to show what we learned earlier out in the field. Today, this is a runoff demonstration where we're going to have this grass representing a vegetated area, this representing bare soil, and this binder representing an impervious surface, which is anything that is paved, concrete, or anything else that doesn't allow water to infiltrate. We're going to use Kool-Aid powder to represent any sort of nutrients, pollutants, or anything else sitting on the surface that's not part of a normal everyday part of nature. Then we're going to pour water over them to see how much water we get to go in each of the 3 containers at the bottom of each surface. So as we can see, we had all the pollutant Kool-Aid and a lot of the water come into the container. Bare dirt, we see a lot of the actual soil erosion, the sediment, and about the same, but about a little bit more than the impervious surface. And in the vegetated area, you have almost no water and almost no pollutants. So this goes with what these practices, and having a vegetated cover is better for keeping soil and the nutrients on it where it needs to be. Farmers are a large part of our community, And these practices that they do, such as the cover crops we see below us or the strips behind us, keep nutrients like manure, sediment, and fertilizer on the field and not in the stream.
So to wrap up today's station, what I'd like to talk about is what you can do to prevent water quality problems such as from infiltration or runoff. You can go, when anybody wants to fertilize their lawn, do a soil test. See if it actually needs the fertilizer, and don't spread any more than it actually calls for. Don't put any chemicals down drains or into your lawns or anything like motor oil or antifreeze, because it'll end up in the surface waters or the groundwaters. Also, never leave any bare soil available. If you have a garden, plant a cover crop. If you dug up a new area for a patio, reseed it immediately and make sure it's covered with something like straw to stabilize it from any rain to prevent soil erosion. Hopefully today you got to see what farmers and what you can do to help keep water quality high.